I saw the show, and this guy was a really good artisan. And he's an old man like me, okay? But he's doing this beautiful work. And then he tells us a little bit about his life. And when he was a child, he couldn't read. And he couldn't spell. Today we'd say he had a learning disability. Back then, they just called you stupid. And he grew up going through school. Still ringing, turn me down just a little bit more, Candace. He grew up going to school being told he was stupid. And he finally just quit. Became a logger, went out in the woods, went into the army. But for a lot of his life, he never valued what he did. He never valued the quality of the work and the workmanship that he put into things. And he said it's only been in the last probably 10, 20 years that he realized that he was worth something. That all those things he was told when he was young, they weren't really true. It's just they didn't know what to do for him, so they just gave up. Those words scored with me. Because I grew up as a dyslexic child, couldn't read till I was in my 20s, still can't spell anything. But that rang with me, of this man who was told over and over again how dumb he, how he didn't care, he didn't try. I heard those words and it meant a lot to me. Changes. Life and life changes. So when I was a boy, I wasn't doing good in school. My daddy decided that I needed to learn to do something. So he put me out on the construction site. I didn't last long. I learned real quick I wasn't a construction worker. Digging footings and stuff like that, yeah, that just wasn't for me. Now I'm going to use David because David went through a lot of changes in his life. Things didn't stay the same. 1 Samuel 17, 34 and 35, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose against me, I caught it by the beard, struck it, and killed it. David started out as a shepherd, taking care of sheep. Now understand who David was at that time. A shepherd was considered the lowest person in the nation of Israel. When you were a shepherd, they treated you like, gypsies, okay? You were thieves, you were bad people, you weren't to be trusted. That's how they viewed shepherds in Israel in the time. Well, then I tried my hand at drywalling. I was a pretty good drywaller. I could pick up that drywall and put it up on the walls and everything else. Didn't take a lot of learning to do it. You just had to learn to get good at it. And I started getting good at it, and I was working up. I was going to be a journeyman, was offered journeyman as a drywaller. Man went to my mama and says, well, he's fixing to turn 18 years old. He can go with us. We're moving to another state here to do another big job. We're going to give him journeyman. He's going to make really good money. And my mama looked at that man and he says, he ain't going with you because I ain't going to have him around a bunch of drunks. And that ended that. David, one of the servants, answered and said, talking to Saul, look, I have seen the son of Jesse in Bethlehem, who is skillful in play, a mighty man of valor and man of war, prudent in speech and handsome in person, and the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messenger to Jesse, saying, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And so it was that whenever the Spirit of God was upon Saul, David would play on the harp, would take the harp and play it with his hand. And Saul would become refreshed and well. And the distressed spirit would depart from him. So he went from following sheep out in the woods, out in the wilderness, to in the king's palace, playing an instrument, playing a harp for the king. That was a big change in his life, going from that one place to another, going from following a bunch of sheep out there in the wilderness to sitting in a king's palace and playing the harp for the king himself. So he became a musician. God takes us, and if you look back at your life, think of the different things that God's had you try your hand at. Sometimes it was only for a couple days. Sometimes it may have took up a good portion of your life. But God has us work in different things. So I went from almost being a drywaller to in the military. I ended up 17 years old, signed up, raised my hand. Vietnam War was going off, and I was off into the Navy, floating around on aircraft carriers. It continued on. I worked on helicopters. I was a flight mechanic. I was the one that pulled people off burning boats and stuff like that. 22 years I did that. God trained me in that. Had a lot of side jobs while I did that. Worked at a metal company, worked at a computer company, built those up. David was a warrior. 1 Samuel 18:25. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely, and God set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of the people, also in the sight of Saul's servants. David acted wisely. David became a man of war. So you see the changes that are happening in David's life? God doesn't do this randomly. God's got a purpose behind what he does. All the experiences in your life that you've come to up to this point were preparing you for something. Now for some of that big thing he was preparing for you has already happened and you're on the other side of it. But God prepares you for stuff. He doesn't do, I use this with my kids all the time. God doesn't do random. He has a purpose in everything he does. I tried my hand at social working with disturbed children. You know what I found out? I wasn't too good at it. You know, sometimes you try things that you're just not really good at. It's not what you're suited for. I just didn't fit going from being that aircraft mechanic and working with people in a school situation, training people to work on planes and stuff, to working with kids that had legal problems and every other kind of problem you can imagine. King David became king. Now think of the transition. He went from warrior to a king. He went through a lot of things in that while he was a warrior before he became a king. He spent many years in that role of leading an army. But eventually, Samuel 2, 4 through 7. Now Saul has already died at this point. Then the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, the men of Judah, Gilead, were the ones who buried Saul. So David sent a messenger to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, you are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown the kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and having buried him. And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you. I also will repay you for this kindness, because you have done this thing. For now, therefore, let your hands be strengthened and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Notice what David did. This is the thing. He had worked with those armies and men all this time, and now he's king. He didn't just become king and say, look at me, I'm the king. No, what does he do? He reaches out to people. And he says, blessed are you. What did they do? Saul had been killed. They had hung his body on a fence with his sons. And these men went, fought their way through and got those bodies. And they buried him and showed kindness. A misconception. David loved Saul and Saul's sons. David was close to them. Saul was the one that had a problem. It was never David. So David's honoring these men that took care of their master, their king, when Saul died. So now here's something that would have surprised everybody at my school. Next slide, Candace. I became a teacher. And if you had asked any, especially my guidance counselor, who told me it'd be a waste of time for me to ever go to any kind of school or college, that'd be just a waste of time. You just need to find a trade. Okay? I ended up becoming a school teacher. I went through college, finished college, became a technology teacher, then a computer teacher, then a robotics teacher, and now an aviation and aerospace teacher. Okay? That was so far from what I thought I would be. If you'd have told me when I was 17 years old, quitting school and joining the military during the war, that I would end up being a teacher, I and my whole family probably would have told you it's crazy. David became a builder. Now he's king. Now God has given him the resources. And David prepared iron in abundance for the nails of the doors and the gates, for the joints, bronze in abundance, beyond measure, and cedar trees in abundance. For the Sidonians and those from Tyre brought much cedar wood to David. Now David said, Solomon, my son, is young and inexperienced, and the house is to be built, for the Lord must be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout the countries. Now I will make preparations for it. So David made abundant preparations before his death. So now he's king. He tried to build the temple himself, and God said, no. You've been a man of war all your life. You shed a lot of blood. You're not going to get to do it. Your son's going to do it. What you're going to do is you're going to prepare things for your son to be able to do it. You can do the plans. You can get all the stuff together. You can be all... Now, David did a lot of other buildings in the city, the walls of the city and all that, but the temple he was kept from doing. God wanted a man of peace to do that, not a man of war. But in that, he became a builder. If you had said to anybody that I would end up standing up here, yeah, they would have looked at you like you'd grown a third eye. Because in my youth, I was something of a wild child. And the idea that I would end up here. Now, there's several parts. In my early childhood, I was strong with the Lord, loved the Lord, went on mission trips, did all kinds of things, but then I hit my teens and I fell away, like most teens do. Went in the military, oh, that was ugly. Several years, running around the world, but I came back to the Lord. He never let go of me. We talked about in Sunday school this morning. He never left my side. I left him, but he never left my side. He never gave up on me. And finally, he drew me back. At first, it was in little ways. I taught a Sunday school class. I looked at the preacher. I says, I know I'm being called to do this. I said, if I don't know how to do it, I could barely read. And he says, the Lord will take care of that. And he did. The Lord took care of that. The Lord brought somebody in my life that helped me out. It made it where I could read like most people read. When I was a child, most of you read from left to right. As a child, I read from right to left. Did it all the way into my 20s. Nobody ever caught it until a certain person was put in my life who saw what was going on and helped me to retrain my mind and my eyes to read like everybody else. And from that point on, God took off in my life. First book I ever read was the Bible. Read it through twice. Just because I was happy to be able to read. David, a man of God. 2 Samuel 6, 12 through 16. David made attempts to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, but his heart wasn't right on his first try. He tried to do it the quick and easy way, and it went way wrong. So God had him back up. A lot of prayer probably went into this,
And finally he says, okay, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it the right way. Have you ever tried to do something, do it the easy way, and it just fell apart? Okay? David had to go back and do it right. Now it was told the king, David, saying, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. That's where David put the ark when everything fell apart. He couldn't get it to Jerusalem. He just put it in this man's house, and God just blessed that man. So David went and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And so it was when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. You see, his mistake first is try to do it the fast way, let's go get a brand new cart, we're going to put the ark on there, and we're going to run it up to Jerusalem. Well, that's not the way to do it. All the way back from the Old Testament, you didn't move the ark unless it was carried by hand. And he was trying to do it the fast way. Now they're doing it the right way. They got the priest out there, they picked up the ark, and they started walking it to Jerusalem. They'd only go a short ways, and they'd stop and do a sacrifice to the Lord. I imagine it was a long, slow process to get that from where it was to where they were going, which was quite a few miles. Then David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought the ark up of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. David's life changed constantly. But nothing in David's life was wasted. In everything that God did with David, he had purpose behind. From the time he was in the sheepfold and watching them sheep, what would it say? Animals would attack those sheep, and David learned how to defeat those animals with nothing but a stick and a staff. He defeated those animals. He was being trained as a young child to get ready to be what he was going to be when he commanded the armies. He learned to be tender and kind. He learned to play the flute. Think about the Psalms of David and how much of that is music. God put a love of music in David's heart. Why? So he could praise the Lord. And he understood his position, that he's still just a servant. It doesn't matter if he's the king or the shepherd, he's still a servant of the Lord. I can look back at my life. That time when I was a construction worker, God was teaching me, even then, even though I wasn't very good at it, he was teaching me techniques that I would use later on in my life to go on mission trips and build churches. He was teaching me how to properly swing a hammer. I remember when I was a little boy and Daddy teaching me how to rebuild a house. God uses those experiences later on in your life. All my mechanical skills. God's got me teaching kids, and they're getting jobs, and they have futures. And I can be there and be an example. It has to be an overt example. But I can be an example to those kids by just being there and living the life that you're supposed to live. Being here. God trained me when I was a child on mission trips. Mission trips I'd even forgot about till many years later of what God had us do. Going out into the towns and working with people and doing things in people's backyards that He's come and used later on in my life. God does not waste experiences. Even the hardships of being separated. I can remember being out on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, early in the morning before the sun come up, realizing how lonely I felt. But I still had my Bible. I remember looking down because I was on a flying bridge area that we used to go out on so we could look at the back of a jet engine and see what the flame pattern was being out there, and you could literally look underneath the aircraft carriers, and I saw what looked like ghosts coming up. And it's like, I couldn't believe, what is that? I had to go and ask some questions. What is that? It was the big, huge propellers, as big as this building is here, turning and pulling the phosphorus off the bottom of the ocean up to the top. And those bright, glowing globs that look like ghosts, that was the phosphorus. God gave me that experience. All these things He does in your life, He has a purpose behind. You just don't realize it at the time. So God's brought me here. It's my second church I've pastored at. You know something? My last church, when we were leaving Alabama, I asked God for two things. He says, we got to leave, we got to move. But I would like to preach in a small church with senior people. That's what I asked God for. Well, guess what He gave me? Exactly what I asked for. Because it's where my heart was. So God uses the experiences you have in your life. They're not always good experiences. I'm telling you, being out on that aircraft carrier, eating that food. Oh, here's a really hard thing. We had a problem with our boiler systems, and our water tanks sat next to the jet fuel tanks, and they leaked. And jet fuel leaked and would seep into the water, and when you would drink or eat anything, it tasted like jet fuel. It smelled like jet fuel. I lost a lot of weight while I was out there because I had a hard time eating anything. I ate everything when we came into port, but when we were out there, it wasn't a lot of fun. But God used that experience to get me quiet and alone. God's looking back at your life, and that's what I'm doing this for. I want you to look back at all the experiences God's put you through the heartaches that He's put you through. All of that was to prepare you. And it wasn't just for now. Pastor Bill, I'm retired. I don't do a whole lot anymore. What would it be for now? It's not for now. It's for your glorious future you have in front of you. On the other side of the veil. We are that close to the other side. That close. At any moment, any one of us can make that transition. And we have a future ahead of us. And God has spent a whole lifetime preparing you for what you're going to do for the next millions of years. And getting you ready. He says, I mold each one of you so that you fit into the kingdom of heaven. Every one of our life experiences, they're different. Yours isn't like mine, isn't like hers, isn't like hers. Our experiences are different. Why? He has a specific purpose when we get to the other side for us, and He has to mold us and make us. He said, you're like a rough asher. When you're born, you're like a rough asher rock, and I got to chip away everything to make you a perfect asher fit for the kingdom of heaven. You say, well, why am I still here, Pastor? Because you ain't quite perfect yet. He's still got some work to do. He's got a lot of work to do here to get me ready for that moment when I will make the transition from this world to the next world. I can't wait for my glorious future. My new body. How many of you are tired of the aches and the pains and the hurts in the back and everything else that you live through now? You won't have those when you get to the other side. You're going to be like that young person you were at 15, 16, 17 years old, able to do whatever you want, and God will have you in a perfect body doing the perfect thing that you love the most and that He spent all your life getting you ready for. I don't know about you, But that should excite you. That should give you purpose to be here to praise God for what He's going to do for you. It's got to excite you. It's got to give you that reason to get up in the morning and open that Bible and spend time with God. To pick up that prayer list and pray over those people that you're hurting about. And tell Him, thank you, Lord. Thank you, not for this moment maybe. Maybe I'm going through a hard time. Maybe there's something going on. One of my grandkids have gone astray or something like that. Maybe you can't thank Him for that much, but that experience He's given you is preparing you. Thank you for what I am going to be. I love the scene where all the disciples are discouraged and they're huddled in a little room, afraid any minute the Romans are going to kick down the door and drag them all away and kill them all. And while they're huddled in there in fear, Jesus appears in a locked room. He says, come here, touch me, hold me, see I'm real. Folks, that's the body we'll have. He says, and we will be like Him. That's what you're going to have. It's going to all be good again. And you need to praise God for what He's going to do. I want to thank you for joining us here at Frontenac Baptist Church in Cocoa, Florida. Whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, we appreciate you being here with us. I hope you've gotten something out of this sermon. And once again, thank you for joining us here at Frontenac Baptist Church in Cocoa, Florida.